Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to today's partner web conference, Dynamics 365 for Field Service Updates, and F&O Integration. Presented by Jason Cohen, Senior Program Manager, and David Clark, Program Manager. My name is Leslie. I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today indicates your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Access to the web conference recording will be delivered by email within 48 hours post-conference. If you have any questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Our presenters will be answering questions throughout today's presentation, and there will also be time at the end for any final Q&A. Now on to the presentation. David, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Leslie. So, hey everyone, I am Dave Clark, and I lead readiness for Field Service, Universal Resource Scheduling, and Connected Field Service. And what that means is it is my job to teach the important updates and the solution details to all the stakeholders, whether they're Microsoft partners or customers. And I'm here with Jason Cohen, who you'll hear from later, who is the program manager for Field Service. And like Leslie said, we are going to talk about the Field Service updates along with the finance and operations integration. Some of the things that you may hear today haven't been released yet, so please keep that in mind. Some of them may be subject to change, and please do not announce them on any public forums. So the three things we're going to speak about today are we have a few important announcements related to the Field Service product. We want to talk about the Spring 2019 features, both ones that have been released and are soon to be released. And then we also want to give an update on the finance and operations integration between Field Service. So first, let's go through the announcements. We have scheduled the end of life for Field Service version 7 online. And what this means is that customers will need to update to our version 8 by February 2020. And what defines version 8 is it's called our UCI version, our Unified Client Interface. And what this also means is that we'll stop updating version 7 of the solution by this October, and support will actually end by December 2019. Keep in mind this only applies to version 7 online and not on-premise. Now, the next thing is we're working towards auto updates. And what this means is this is a Dynamics initiative that Field Service is adopting. And what it is that your solution, your Field Service solution, will get to the point where it'll automatically update as new versions come out. Now, this will actually start first with our version 7, and eventually we'll work towards our version 8. Along similar lines, anytime you create a new environment of Field Service, it'll automatically be on the version 8 org, which again is that UCI. And we have links here to blog posts that'll give more details. So when we send this PowerPoint out after this meeting, you'll be able to view those. We also tend to get a lot of questions about the on-premise solution of Field Service. And just a quick update there. First, the latest available on-premise solution of Field Service is 7.6. We haven't committed to when the next on-premise version of the next on-premise version for Field Service 7, and we haven't committed to when there'll be an on-premise version for the latest 8.9 release. Also on the bottom here, we have links to all the latest release notes for Field Service. So over the course of the Spring 2019 wave, we've gone from Field Service version 8.6 to the latest one, which is 8.9. And you'll see links here to the specific blog posts that'll go over each enhancement and any bug fixes that occurred with those. And a little bit later, Jason will be giving more details on each of these announcements. So let's take a look at some of the 2019 updates for Field Service. The first thing that we did was we released new solution health rules. Now, so the Solution Health Hub is a somewhat new Dynamics app that Field Service is utilizing. And basically what it is the Solution Health Hub will diagnose and in some cases even resolve issues that you're having with Field Service, along with other Dynamics apps. So what they did was the support team was getting a bunch of common requests for Field Service and common errors and common mistakes. And what they were able to do is they can turn those common requests into rules. Then you can execute those rules, and then the system will tell you, here's the problem and here's the solution, and sometimes it'll actually go ahead and implement that solution. So what this really means is that if you are having some issues with your Field Service org, you should actually think about going to Solution Health Hub first and running the specific Field Service rules. Also, if you updated to the Field Service solution this spring, you'll see that there's actually a new training section inside the application. And what this is right from the Field Service application, you'll have links to our documentation, our community, our idea site, and even support. Another fairly important update for the spring was Field Service is utilizing work hour templates. This is something that Universal Resource Scheduling has been doing for a while, but we're improving that experience for Field Service. And one application of that is that you can add a work hour template to, let's say, a service account or a work order. And then when someone goes to schedule that work order, you can have, for example, a default time zone on that schedule assistant experience. And we arrived at this because of a lot of common customer requests where they wanted more flexibility in the timing controls and the time zone of their schedulers. The default is that the schedule assistant will load in the time zone of the user record who is triggering it, but this allows greater flexibility. Those are the three largest ones, but between version 8.6 and 8.9 of Field Service, there's been a few smaller important updates. One that was a convenience for us is when you convert a case to a work order, that work order will open in a new view. We can also now add locations to an agreement. So in the past, when you create agreement, it would create on-site work orders, which means that you're going to send someone on-site to perform the work order. But with the new update, you can actually have an agreement that creates facility type work orders where the customer is actually going to come to a facility, or even location agnostic agreements where maybe it could just be a recurring remote work. Also for agreements, we can now choose the agreement time that they are generated. So in the past, agreements would generate at, I believe, UTC midnight, but that's not always very convenient for customers. So in Field Service settings, you can actually go ahead and specify the time that the agreement what time the system should begin generating all the work orders from an agreement. And then one other update is, for those who have been working with a solution for a while, when you create new work orders, it'll tag a work order number to it. And this has been a Field Service specific function. But with the latest release, or part of the spring wave, work orders will now utilize the Dynamics 365 auto numbering, what you would see on, let's say, the case entity, for example. And what's important about this is it can actually guarantee that it's a unique number that is generated. Whereas though for work orders, it was very, very high chance it was unique, it wasn't an absolute guarantee. And this is something that was important for some of our customers who really, based on their business processes and based on the integrations they had with other systems, they really needed to ensure that the work order numbers were absolutely unique. So I'd like to give a quick update on the integration with finance and operations as well. So for about a year now, we've had an AppSource app called Field Service Integration Project and Inventory. And that applies for Field Service 8.2 and above and Finance and Operations 8.1. And it was a very simple integration back and forth between Field Service and Finance Operations, right? It was very easy to say, take Finance and Operations products and have those products appear in Field Service. But what the team is working on is actually a brand new integration template that updates this. One example is that the AppSource app one here to the left would run asynchronously, where the one that they're working on now that they expect to come out would actually be more real time. And I actually want to bring in Jason, who can provide perhaps more details on this. Jason, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yep. So let me sort of share a little bit more about this this integration. So a couple things that, as Dave said, so we have had this one integration pattern out for a while through this AppSource app, which uses our data integrator capabilities to enable some generally asynchronous integrations between field F&O and field service in CDS. What we're working on is enabling the dual write functionality that's been available for a while from F&O to push data directly into CDS, where that data becomes available in your Dynamics customer engagement org, and there'll be a number of use cases where that's valuable for FS. So a number of things that we're working on that aren't quite available yet, but should be available in the coming months are going to be around customer asset, around purchase order. Eventually, we'll also have, our intent is to make all of the places in F&O where there are overlapping or complementary functionality, have that automatically flow through back and forth between these two systems. So that isn't something that's going to happen immediately, but we will see that lighting up over time for many of these key field service functions where F&O has a complementary or overlapping function. And that won't, so for clarity, that AppSource app is unlikely to go away. There's still a little bit of discussion here, but for clarity, that is unlikely to go away. We still see some value around the way that these integrations work, and some of them don't have to, some of the scenarios where these are integrating don't have to be real time. They cater to potentially slightly different use cases. But there'll be more details as that story becomes more finalized. That's something that is going to be pretty key and is something that we're working towards now.
Hey, Jason, if I can interject for a sec.
Yeah.
Can you give any updates on what is the Dynaway purchase and what does that mean for field service?
Yeah, good question. So we've, I guess, F&O has acquired have added an enterprise asset management capability, which, for clarity here, Dynaway, the enterprise asset management capability is not field service. So the enterprise asset management capability typically is the use case that they're working towards for this is typically for like a plant management scenario or a facilities management scenario where I don't typically have traveling resources. My resources are probably on site. I'm scheduling them. I also don't likely have a customer invoicing model for this. It's all internal asset management and maintenance scenarios. So I know there's been some discussion as to whether this is infringes on what a field service does. We look at these as complementary, and in fact, there'll be a number of places where we're trying to make these things work seamlessly together to light up really sort of interesting use cases where I manufacture a product, and as an organization that manufactures a product, I might have an enterprise asset management scenario, but then once I sell that product, I might also have sold maintenance or or installation services that field service may be driving. So we're working to make that clearer in terms of how these things interact together and to make that more automatic through the dual write capabilities. Thanks, Dave. Good question. Let's jump to, so Dave talked a little bit about a couple of these things. I just want to show some of them in the system so that hopefully folks will have a little bit of a better understanding of how these work and answer a couple of questions. All right, so Dave talked about our our Solution Health rules. In case you haven't, our Solution Health Hub, in case you haven't seen this, this is a really useful functionality around how to, sort of how can we help provide service support rather for issues that customers commonly experience without them needing to raise an issue, so that they get more, sort of a more complete and rapid response to an issue where sometimes support requests, as we all know, take a little bit longer than we'd like. So the idea is with the Solution Health Hub, for our issues that we're seeing pretty commonly, that won't be so painful because we can get them resolved quite quickly. So it's an app module. So if I were to look within my list of apps, I would see Solution Health Hub here. I can go into Solution Health Hub, and if I have Field Service installed, I also should have the rules for Field Service installed. So if I push new here, it's going to ask me to, what rule set do I want to run against? I'll pick the Field Service rule set and say OK. And what's happening now is it's going to generate create a run which will generate results, and those results will say whether it's passed or failed. And so we have a number of rules in here which are looking for things that we commonly see or we commonly get support requests around that can be quite disruptive. So in this case, here's a particular rule that failed in this org, which is saying that some of the SDK message processing steps are inactive. In this case, if I click on this line, I can push the resolve button, and it's automatically going to resolve that for me. And a number of these rules will have that capability. Not all of them, because they're not all so simple to resolve. And so in those cases, there might be some more description, or it may be necessary to contact support, but at least we've identified the issue.
Hey, Jason, can you give an example of maybe a common error or a common reason that a Solution Health Hub could solve?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So we see a number of things that, like this rule that I just pointed out, where we see SDK message steps where the customers don't realize that somehow they've become inactive, and that causes obviously lots of potential issues downstream. Similarly for processes which maybe have become inactive. So if there was any process that's been disabled that shouldn't be, that we have an expectation that it stays active, this would surface that issue, and we see that commonly. In fact, that it's very one issue we sometimes see customers raising is that the schedule board starts to throw errors, and that is most often related to these processes being inactive. Another thing which happens quite often is that a user, because of organizational turnover, of course, one user who happened to own a bunch of processes maybe leaves the organization. So when a user leaves an organization, and maybe they were removed from the system, or they become an inactive user, then those processes that try to run under their context would fail. So we try to highlight things like that say, hey, we see some processes that are owned by somebody who's no longer part of the organization. But there's a number of things in here where we're checking for things that we've seen often in the past, and when possible, we try to resolve those. So if in the case of inactive processes or inactive SDK steps, reasonably simple to resolve, where we effectively say, hey, we see these are inactive, we expect them to be active, we're going to, if you'd like, we can reactivate them for you by pushing resolve. For some things that are a little bit more complicated, like deleted web resources, which is something that we occasionally see, where somebody's deleted a number of web resources, that's not as easy to resolve. So if those web resources are something that we expect, there's not at the moment, there's not an easy resolve button for that one. You'd still need to contact support, but we can highlight that this is likely the issue, and it'll make that support case that much faster. Yeah, good question, Dave. All right, let's see. So the next item in the list that Dave talked about before was, so we've added a training section. So obviously this is hopefully, sort of not that outrageous, but all what we're really doing here is highlighting a number of really useful resources that a lot of our customers should be aware of in terms of documentation. So we have in this training section here a number of links, including a link to our documentation, a link to our community where people, it's a fairly active community where people are sort of raising field service related questions and sort of talking about best practices, and sometimes talking about challenges that they're running into and how they get around them. Ideas, which we do actively look at, where if you see something that you'd like to work in a different way, if you raise an idea, it's obviously it will be added to the forum, and customers have an opportunity to vote on those ideas. And when something has enough votes, we take it very seriously and look into whether there's a way for us to implement that and in a way that is going to be useful for our customer base. And then finally, support, of course, and then Help Center's been there for a while. This takes us to some more generic capability or more generic resources around the Dynamics platform. Let's see, work hour templates. So let's talk about that quickly here as well. So we've enabled, so as Dave mentioned, work hour templates have been available for a while on resource scheduling. So resource scheduling has often, or has for quite a while, had on the resource requirement a field for work hour template. What this has driven for them at the moment, the only thing that it drives is when you use the any of our scheduling tools, so Schedule Assistant, Experience effectively, or a Quick Scheduling, which is a new scheduling experience, that it respects the time zone associated with that work hour template. So if I'm a user looking at a work order that's got a work hour template that's associated to Pacific Standard Time versus Eastern Standard Time, and I push the book button, I should see that it's returning results to me relative to the time zone that I've set here in my work hour template. So if I want to make sure that I'm looking at this, in terms of the Eastern Standard Time, effectively this will help me drive that. So I don't have to do the mental math to understand the results that are coming back from the scheduling tools.
Can I ask one question here, Jason?
Yeah.
So is one idea that if I'm a scheduler and all of my work orders are in the same time zone, then that's fine. I just set my time zone to that and I go about my business. But is the main benefit here that I could actually manage work orders in multiple time zone? Is the main benefit here the time zone part of it?
At the moment, for sure, yeah, that is the main benefit. I don't want to speak for resource scheduling to talk about anything that they might be planning in this area in the future. I suspect there are a number of things, but for now, the only thing that it drives is our time zone of that scheduling experience, which is useful for those, for when I'm using the assisted scheduling tools. Right from the record, and I'm managing this for multiple time zones. To be clear, if I'm directly opening a schedule board and looking at the schedule board experience for each schedule board, I still can configure my time zone. So if I set up a schedule board which is associated to my New York office, I set that to Eastern Time, and if I set it up for for my Los Angeles office, I set that up for Pacific Time, and I don't have to, this wouldn't have an impact there. Those are directly defined on the schedule board. But when I use the book button, it's going to help automatically make sure that booking experience is surfaced in the time zone that makes sense for that area.
All right, so we should really think of it in terms of the schedule assistant.
Yeah, that's right. For now, that's what this drives. That's right. Let's see, the next thing, Dave. Oh, actually, the other thing I should point out here. So if I define this I'm showing an account here. So if I define the work hour template here at the account level, when I raise a work order on this account, it'll pick up the associated work hour template. So I don't have to manually set this. I set it at my related account and it'll drive through. Of course, if you choose to drive it some other way, you could use business rules to do something like that. Maybe not business rules, processes. Let's see, so that's work hour template. I'll briefly talk about a couple other things that Dave talked about. I mean, as he mentioned, this one's fairly minor, but converting case to a work order. So we received some feedback that if I raise a work order from a case, what we were doing for a little while there in in FS version 8, our UCI version, is that we were driving the associated work order. We were opening the work order in the same window. So in that same window, we were on case. We said convert to work order, and it opens up a work order. Well, but the feedback that we received was that they often wanted to keep both things open so they can continue working on both at the same time. So fairly simple change, but we made that change so that would happen. So if I convert to work order here, this will open in a new window rather than overriding the existing window, so that I don't lose whatever opportunities I had to work on my case here. I don't lose that window. So let's also talk about, Dave mentioned, our agreement locations. So we have for a long time had the ability to generate obviously recurring work from our agreements. So if I'm going to go perform, obviously usually this is related to preventative maintenance. So if I'm going to go perform preventative maintenance from for a particular location, service account or asset, I can generate a work order. And that's always the way that's always worked, is that the assumption is that work is an on-site recurring work. What we lit up recently was the fact that didn't have to always be on-site. So if I've set up my IoT scenarios and I want to make sure that somebody's doing some remote diagnostics on a monthly basis, I can set this up in from a location agnostic perspective. Or if the work needs to be performed at a facility, I can also set this up so that it generates recurring work that should be performed at a facility. So the idea here is, while this was great before for on-site work, we are now enabling other work patterns where I don't always have to go visit the site, but it still should happen on a recurring basis. The other thing on agreement that came in this same time frame, in this last wave. So as Dave mentioned, we had a couple of challenges where organizations, especially in New Zealand and Australia, and some portions of Asia, but everywhere. I mean, we would generate the work order, and that wasn't always at a great time. It was always, we were generating it at rigidly at UTC midnight, which isn't great for lots of portions of the world. And obviously we recognized that was something we needed to change. So what we've enabled here, on both at the agreement level and at the field service settings level, is the ability to define the record generation timing. So if at the field service settings level, if I know for my whole organization that based on my user time zone, for clarity here, this is user time zone, not UTC. So for my time zone, I want this to generate at 2 a.m. Then I can define here that it should generate these records at 2 a.m. And so all records in the system, unless otherwise defined, will generate at 2 a.m. And I say unless otherwise defined, of course, because here in the agreement header itself, on the other tab, I can also say what time should this record generate. So let's say I have let's say I'm not an organization that I want, where I want this to happen at the same time for the whole, for my whole organization. But if I have some some things that are happening in a portion of the world where it would make sense for that to happen at a different time, I can define that on a per agreement basis, so that those records don't get generated in a disruptive manner where I see a bunch of work orders popping up in the middle of the day. That are maintenance work orders, that and then obviously that's a hit to the asynchronous queue. We shouldn't anticipate any real problems with that, but of course often best to manage that at a time when it's going to be less disruptive. So that is both manageable at the agreement level and at the field service settings level at a more generic at a more sort of generic environment-wide setting. Let's see, second to last thing here. So also on the agreement, sorry, on the field service settings, I apologize. On the field service settings, we recently also introduced this auto numbering change. So we've always had auto numbering. Organizations, using field service have auto, work orders. We generate an auto number for purchase orders. A series of entities we're generating auto numbers for, and that's always worked with a mechanism that was specific to field service. And while that was great, there were some problems with it where, under certain circumstances that were uncommon but not impossible, an organization could get duplicate numbers on some of those things, which was some organizations found incredibly disruptive. That wasn't an acceptable scenario. So for a couple of reasons, including that reason, we have enabled that an organization can opt into the platform auto numbering capability, and we've enabled that to be a push button experience where you just sort of say opt into the auto numbering to the auto numbering functionality, the new auto numbering function. So if I push this button, we'll get a little warning here that explains, that by proceeding, you're doing this. That here's some benefits. Here are the things that you'll see might change. And there are a couple of warnings to sort of try to do this during a period of time when the system is less active. Ultimately, this takes for this actual opt-in to occur. This takes seconds, but any work orders being generated at that time can have slightly unpredictable behavior. So the suggestion is to do this during off-peak hours. The benefits here are, obviously that we are guaranteeing a unique record name, and that we'll have fewer gaps. So right now, with our current auto numbering functionality, if I start to generate a record for a work order, let's say, but then I actually decide we don't need to generate a work order. The way our legacy auto numbering functionality worked, or I should say works, because it's still in place in most of our organizations, you won't get that record number again. So if it was work order 123 and I decide not to do it, the next person who generates a work order won't get work order number 123. They'll get 124, even though 123 was never generated. So you'll see fewer gaps. You'll see there's a number of other sort of more configurable capabilities around this. So it has a number of benefits for organizations that require some of these capabilities. And ultimately, eventually, we will make this change everywhere. But for now, we make this an opt-in experience so that organizations can choose to uptake this when it makes sense. The sort of visible number format for these, we make sure that by default they continue to operate with the existing number format. For those of you who are familiar with the auto numbering functionality, you have the ability to configure that numbering format, and we respect that as well. So if you choose to make changes to the way that those work order numbers or purchase order numbers or any of the entities that we're numbering for you, if you choose to make a change to the way that is formatted, that's going to be reflected in the numbers that are generated for those records.
So when you opt in here in field service settings, do you need to go to dynamic settings after this, or no, it's just one step?
Just one step. Yep, you just push this button, and for all of the entities that we auto number, we're going to change it over from our previous approach where field service managed it with a custom field service owned auto numbering process to the platform approach.
Okay, for all work orders going forward.
For all work orders, for all purchase orders, for all RMAs, inventory transfers. Like there's a list of records that we were generating numbers for. So that's right.
Excellent.
So I'll talk. Let me jump back here and talk a little bit about a couple of the announcements that Dave touched on, just to both recap and sort of provide a little bit more depth here. So for Field Service version 7, which is the version that's been around for many years, we've been improving our field service capabilities for a while now. Everything that I just talked to is an example, and a lot of things that you've probably seen on previous webinars around URS or CFS. A lot of those investments, most of those investments, only accrue to the Field Service version 8 or URS version 3. So what we're announcing here is that 7 is going end of life. That's the web-only version of Field Service, and that will happen. We'll stop shipping regular updates in October. We'll stop if we were to run into a critical issue. Of course, we'd still ship some updates, but that'll only continue until December. After December, we won't ship any updates, even for critical issues. The expectation is customers will update to Field Service version 8. So the sooner an organization can get onto Field Service version 8, the better. A couple things worth pointing out here. So for organizations to continue to receive updates, on version 7, we've put all existing customers on version 7 into a flight so that they continue to receive version 7 and see version 7 updates only. If you stand up a new org, you would see that one automatically gets Field Service version 8, and you won't. And if obviously as new versions come available, you can upgrade that. What you won't see is any version 7 versions of Field Service. So the way that this becomes important, the reason that I'm sort of highlighting this is for organizations on Field Service version 7, we have put them in a special flight, and at the moment, the best way to get out of that flight is to contact support, which we've documented a process which is fairly simple for them to make a request to get you out of the Field Service version 7 flight, so that you can upgrade an org to version 8. We suggest that organizations do this on a copy of production first, to validate that there's no disruptive impacts to both their field service online functions as well as their mobile functions, which there are some, depending on the version that you're on now for your field service mobile functionality, you may have to update to a new project. So there is some work involved in moving from 7 to 8. We recognize that can be disruptive, and we hope organizations are looking at this as aggressively as possible, so that they're not caught in a state where they're on something that's no longer receiving support, and hopefully we will minimize customer issues. So just want to highlight that this end of life is coming and has some potential implications if organizations aren't taking it seriously. The other thing that Dave mentioned around auto update. So for quite a while, we've wanted to get to this, but it's always been driven by customer updates. For clarity, we have no intentions at any point generate or automatically forcing an upgrade from 7 to 8 because it can be disruptive. That's not something that we're interested in doing. So to move from 7 to 8 for the foreseeable future, that is a organization specific elected scenario. So to move from 7 to 8, we won't upgrade you automatically. If we still see orgs, a ways in the future on version 7, well after this is out of support, it's possible, but it's a last resort. We really don't. That's not something that we're hoping will occur. So for auto updates though, within those versions, for version 7, starting as early as this week, some orgs will start to see this. We will be updating orgs from whatever version they're on to the latest available version. For version 8, that'll also start happening, but it's a little bit further out because there are some additional complexities to some of the version 8 releases. We're moving to patch releases to make these updates as non-disruptive as possible. So that's coming, and for version 7, we'll see that as early as this week for some orgs, and for version 8, will still be another 2 or so months out. As Dave mentioned, of course, on-premise, there's no change to the way that currently works. Field Service version 7 is the latest available version, and there's no change and no dates associated to any changes for that for the foreseeable future. One correction here, and we'll make sure that this gets corrected when we get this released, is the actual latest release is Field Service version 8.8.1. something, not 8.9. That was just a minor typo there, so we'll get that corrected before we send this out. But for folks who may have seen this and wondered why they couldn't see version 8.9, version 8.9 doesn't yet exist. Version 8.8.1 is our latest. Let's see, the last thing that I'd like to talk about here is something that's still coming in the near future. Our intent is to ship this in September timeframe, but there will be some improved crew. Ultimately, this is going to be around crew management. So the way that crews currently work from URS is that you can create work for crews, which is helpful. Obviously, it's lots of scenarios where that's organizations are managing crew work. But what we don't do very well at the moment with the current crew functionality is make that work management and completion experience predictable and simple. So if you have played with this, you can see that it's great for scheduling. It works perfectly. It's really useful. But what you may not have seen if you haven't actually implemented it and had folks starting to use it is that there are some scenarios where we have where you might get unpredictable results in terms of status changes, in terms of updates to the timestamps associated with the records, and then ultimately downstream the journals and actuals that get generated from those records. So what we're going to be driving are a couple of crew strategies. So one strategy will be crew management by leader. So effectively, if I'm the crew leader, I'm the one who drives everyone's status and everyone's related timestamps and journals. And it obviously makes that a very predictable experience from a work completion perspective. The other strategy is crew member self-management. So we are a crew, but if I arrive first, I mark myself in progress, and that doesn't change the fact that another crew member might not yet be there, and that might not yet be in progress. And so we effectively make sure that each member, once the work begins, only once the work begins, each member drives their own status, their own timestamps, their own journals and actuals from that. So that's coming in September timeframe. There'll be a couple of new fields introduced with this change, which you would see on a couple of entities: field service settings, bookable resource group entity, and then the booking itself will show what the bookings crew is, as well as who the leader is. Well, you can identify who the leader is. I think that's the main things I wanted to highlight for that new feature. So hopefully folks will see that and start using it and let us know what they think.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to make people aware of some of the other updates that are happening also related to the field service solution. So technically it's a different solution, but universal resource scheduling works hand in hand with field service. And there were two fairly big updates that happened with URS. One was quick scheduling, and the other one was travel time calculations for manual scheduling. We actually have documentation for both on, if you go to the field service docs.microsoft website. Similarly, for those who know about RSO, Resource Scheduling Optimization, which is the automated scheduling solution, we are continuously coming out with new constraints and new objectives. And as part of the spring 2019 wave, we came out with new ones there. Very soon, we'll be coming out with a new version of the field service mobile app. That'll be 11.3. And this will actually come with a new mobile project that is put out by the product team, which is new configurations and customizations. One of the big changes there is all this great stuff that's happening with connected field service. All that IoT information will also be on the mobile app. And then lastly, we have a few new features for connected field service. And not this week, but the week after that, on July 25th, we'll actually be doing another webinar just like this that's totally dedicated to the connected field service updates. And that's it for this slide. Let's take a look at the Q&A. So Jason, if I could ask you a few questions. We had one question here about the EAM roadmap with Dynaway. Do you know that if we've committed anything to the integration between the EAM solution and field service, or is this really just in the planning phase right now?
So I'm trying to remember what EAM's roadmap says publicly. I know for us, we haven't published this, but for certain we are working to make these things more naturally, work together more naturally through this dual write process. So we do see, as I mentioned, scenarios where there's a great reason why you'd want these things to work together. If I'm an organization that's manufacturing a product, I sell that product gets installed. That whole life cycle is an organization, and then that organization provides service on that product that's installed. That life cycle is something that we recognize as something we want to light up. So for sure, there'll be integrations coming in this.
Interesting. One question here about CoSolution Health Hub. Could you give us an estimate of how many field service CoSolution Health Hub rules are there? And is this something that we expect to add more to, let's say, every release or every year?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is I couldn't tell you the specific number at the moment because we are working on a couple of rules. We were working on a couple of rules in the recent past and are still working on a couple. I think we have 7 or 8, but that number will not stay the same. We will continually add new rules to improve scenarios that we see through support. That we think we can build a rule that would, sort of automatically help organizations resolve that or identify that and significantly shorten the time frame of their support scenarios. So yeah, that number will change. We are consistently adding more, and the number right now is something like 8 or 9. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then similarly, one question here is, how could a CoSolution Health Hub rule automatically solve something. It kind of makes sense that it could diagnose this, but like, what's an example of it actually going ahead and solving something for you?
Yeah. I mean, I talked about this briefly, but sort of the scenarios that I think are most obvious, effectively, are like if you disable a process that we expect to be active, and when that process is disabled, we would see issues with work orders or issues with the schedule board or issues with other aspects of the system. We'll re-enable that process when you push the resolve button. So for clarity, we'll never when you run the rule, we'll never just make changes in your org. So by running the rule, you're just going to get the diagnostic information. But if it is possible for us to automatically resolve the rule, we will try to do that. And you can highlight that rule, click on the resolve button, and it should resolve all instances of that failure. So in the case of inactive processes, if you've disabled, or if there's a series of processes that are disabled, you'd see all the instances of that. So actually, I can quickly what this looks like here. So in this case, I have the ability to resolve this one. If I open this up, what we'll see here is a list of processes that are inactive. In this case, in this org, I only have one. It says that the update pre-validate step for the MSDYN booking journal entity is disabled. So if I push the result, if I ran that resolution, we would see that this would get reactivated. So that would no longer be an issue. So yeah, for some of these we can do that, for some of them we can't. And of course, for clarity, we will never these rules will never automatically make a change in the org, even if we know it's a problem, until an organization chooses to make that change by pushing the resolve button.
Okay. Looks like we have another question here regarding work hour templates. So the question is, how can we set multiple time zones in work hour templates? I would imagine that you can create many work hour templates and each one could have a different time zone, and then you can go ahead and apply that specific work hour template to an account or a work order. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, so if the question is, how can I have multiple templates that might drive different time zones? Yeah, of course, you can set up multiple records that are associated to different time zones. And if I apply that to, accounts that are in New York versus accounts that are in LA being different time zones, then, the booking experience will reflect that. But if the question is within one work hour template, how can I have one work order that's expressing in multiple time zones when I push that book button? That's not something that we currently support. If that's a use case that we're seeing, I'd be interested to understand the use case, and we can talk about if that's such a scenario is something we want to support at the product level, and then how that might work. So if the user if the person who raised that question sees that as a need, please raise it as an idea and with some details on the use case, and we'll take a look.
Interesting. I guess also on the work hour template, Amit said, so does it mean that it will choose the correct schedule board based on the time zone on the work hour template? And I think what we want to say here is this work hour template only applies to the schedule assistant. When it comes to the schedule board, that is dependent upon whatever that schedule board's time zone is set to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. We respect, or we totally understand that the schedule board is organizations, we have an expectation that most organizations are going to have multiple schedule boards, and that those schedule boards should be pre-configured to whatever makes sense for that schedule board. Often those are organized by territory with a specific time zone that makes the most sense for that territory. What this function would drive is that, that, as you said, that assisted scheduling experience, where we are surfacing this not on a schedule board that's been pre-configured, but in that schedule assistant or quick scheduling experience.
Okay, so Amit, when you're on a schedule board, you have to go to the configuration of that schedule board and then set that time zone. And then when you come back to that schedule board, it'll remember that time zone. And again, each tab can have a different time zone. So you can have many tabs in many different time zones.
Exactly.
One here about generation time of agreements. This person said, I didn't see the time zone for the record generation time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good question. And for clarity, so if I'm a user that sets this and I set it to run at 2 a.m., my time zone applies here. And if somebody else logs in who's then, so like let's say I set it for 2 a.m. PST and somebody else logs in who's in New York and they're set up to EST, to Eastern Standard Time, which is 3-hour difference, they will see that as 5 a.m. because for them it is 5 a.m. So the record behind the scenes is stored in UTC value. So it is expressing the time that it will generate records based on my time zone settings.
Interesting. Okay. Here's an interesting one. If we're thinking about field service 8, version 8, the UCI version, can you apply that to a non-UCI version of customer engagement? Or does first you need to upgrade to UCI customer engagement and then you can get the field service UCI?
Yeah, so for clarity, this will only work, field service version 8 should only work in versions of the platform that are compatible with UCI. And in fact, at this point, to be honest, I think we've got 100% adoption for all organizations online anyway, to a UCI compatible version. So that shouldn't be a huge concern. If the question is slightly different, perhaps maybe what they were also trying to get an answer to is, could I use the web interface when I have field service version 8 installed? The short answer to this is we don't, for at least our entities, we don't have an expectation that it works in non-UCI, so in the web. So for instance, if you go to a work order, you've installed field service version 8, you open work order, and you open that through the web client, we would expect that we would expect that there are some things that might not work, and in fact certain controls we repress to make sure that we don't have folks who have an expectation or that it's working and that they would have the same experience. So field service version 8 is specifically compatible with UCI. And as has been publicly announced, the organization as a whole, the platform as a whole, is working towards phasing out the web platform in general. The timeline for that is a little bit longer than field services timeline for end of life for web, but that is something that is coming from the platform perspective as well.
All right. Another question here related to the time zones and work hour template. Is the time zone functionality applicable to URS as well? And I would say the answer is yes, because the time zone functionality actually originated in URS and now field service is adopting it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're just sort of, with our function here, we were just sort of playing catch up. URS had this capability already. We were just making it more automatic for the field service scenarios. So I can apply it at the service account level. That'll reflect at the work order level, which then obviously updates the related requirement and generates that scheduling experience appropriately.
All right, and we just have another minute here, so let's just go to the last 2 questions quickly. First one from Phil. Does Microsoft Forms Pro work with field service in any way? And is there plans to integrate this with field service mobile offline? I feel like this kind of touches on voice of the customer. It kind of touches on the upcoming inspections feature. Is there anything you can say, Jason, about Forms Pro with field service?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on it a little bit. I don't know that we've publicly listed it anywhere yet, but there is an inspections feature we know that we've been working towards, which will be driven, which will rely in large part on the Forms experience. We're working with the Forms team to make extend some capabilities from both an offline mobile perspective, as well as a number of other improvements that we need for it to really satisfy our inspection scenarios. So that isn't yet formally publicly committed, and the timeline for that is still not defined. But it is something that we are working on actively, and there will be some forms-based. There will be a deep forms experience associated with that. So for sure.
All right. Well, we are out of time. If we didn't get to your question, I put my email in the chat. It's daklar@microsoft.com. Just email me the question. We'll answer it. And I guess I'll hand it off to Leslie to finish up.
All right, thanks so much. I have added a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel there. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope you enjoyed today's web conference and found the information helpful. Please do let us know if you have feedback or suggestions for ways we can provide you with a better event. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, and 5 is the highest score possible. As a reminder, all attendees will receive a link to the recording via email within 48 hours. Please note this email will be from learning address, so check your clutter or junk folder if you do not receive it. I'd like to extend a great big thank you to our presenters. Thank you very much, Jason and David, for your presentations and answering all those wonderful questions. And thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.